high-speed action, playoff bubble drama, and a flip during the race? Yeah, that was what the Irish Hills in Michigan was for the NASCAR Cup Series this weekend. Yesterday and today. Hey there, race fans. It's Race Day Top 5 with me, Frank 5. Michigan Speedway. It's fast. It could be brutal at times, but it also provides some very entertaining moments in the Cup Series. This track that we come to, the 2-mile D-oval shaped track, it's very, very fast. You're going over 200 miles per hour into turn number 1, and you better have a clean exit off of turn 2 and turn 4 to carry the momentum down the straightaway against your opponents. And this weekend, on a race that started late yesterday and then got postponed to the rest of the race being today due to Mother Nature, we saw a lot of intense action on the track today. And one driver who's already in the playoffs is in a fight for his life to win the regular season championship and built on it with a win today. Let's get into all that went down. Number 1, Reddick back to victory lane. Tyler Reddick gets his second win of the 2024 season, winning today's FireKeepers Casino 400 at Michigan Speedway, beating out William Byron, Ty Gibbs, Kyle Busch, and Brad Keselowski in 2 overtimes to get the victory. A big race win for Tyler Reddick and his number 45 team. They have been very, very, very consistent this season. They lead all drivers in top 5s and top 10s. 11 top 5s, 17 top 10s. They've just been on a roll since the first 2 races of the season didn't really go his way with the wrecks at Daytona and the wreck at Atlanta. Ever since the Vegas race, they have just been firing on all cylinders. Of course, his first win of the season came at Talladega, where he won right in front of the boss man, Michael Jordan, at Talladega. And ever since then, he has been very, very consistent and has built himself back into the regular season title battle against his car owner, Denny Hamlin, and a couple of Hendrick drivers. But lately, Tyler Reddick, despite being good, hadn't been able to punch his way back to victory lane. He's been close at times. Like, remember, the Chicago Street Course race, he was gaining those last few laps on the dry tires versus Alex Bowman's worn out wet weather tires. But unfortunately, a clip at the wall on the last lap of the race prevented Reddick from having a chance to catch up to the 48 of Alex Bowman. And then we have last week at Richmond, where he finished runner-up at the checkered flag, or third place, really, actually, behind Austin Dillon and Denny Hamlin. He wasn't able to get the victory despite having a really good car. But today he was able to prevail and get the victory. At the beginning of the race that started yesterday, Reddick started in the top 5 and seemed to maintain position for the most part and seemed to have a really good race car. But then we had a late race caution when his car owner, Denny Hamlin, spun out off of turn 4. Most of the cars came down pit road. Reddick was one of them, but unfortunately he didn't get a good restart and fell outside the top 10 at the end of that stage and didn't score any stage points, which is critical because he needs these points to maintain, his efforts to try to win this regular season championship when it's all said and done at Darlington. And then when we restarted the race today, he started inside the top 10, but he faded quickly because, once again, didn't really get the best restart based on the lane he was running. He fell back to as low as 19th, but quickly picked his way back up inside the top 10, and then he got shuffled out again. He had to fall back a little bit towards the end of stage number 2 because of a lot of guys racing side by side in front of him. He was not able to accumulate any stage points at all. But whatever the car did in the final stage, it became a rocket ship. That thing was flying through the field, passing cars one by one on the long runs. The long runs, I think, really benefited Tyler Reddick because he was able to pick them all off and just had good long run speed. And he had a really good pit stop towards the end of the race and his final green flag stop, where he was able to get the momentum he needed and was able to catapult himself past William Byron for the lead with about 20 laps to go within the race. And it looked like it was going to be clear sailing all the way for Tyler Reddick. Until with 6 laps to go, Martin Truex Jr., running in 5th place, got loose off of 4, the back end grazed the wall, and that was enough to bring up the caution, and Reddick was not happy on the radio. He was like, come on, man. The rush with the wall for the 19 is not enough to generate a caution. So he had to go through overtime restarts to try to win the race. And on the first overtime restart, he lost the lead to William Byron for a brief moment until a wreck happened right behind him, bringing out another caution. So therefore, Reddick had to restart on the inside lane because Byron chose the outside. The problem was William Byron was relatively tight on fuel, and we didn't know if he was going to be able to make it. And on that final restart, Reddick got a big push from behind by his Toyota teammate Ty Gibbs and propelled himself into the lead and did not look back whatsoever. The guys behind him just couldn't gang up together and try to run down the 45 car. When he got in that clean air, he was on fire and was able to bring home his second win of the season. Once again, we've been talking about all year long how consistent Denny Hamlin and Christopher Bell have been at times, but I think we're forgetting that Tyler Reddick has been the most consistent of the Toyota drivers by far this season. And there's no doubt about it that this guy can win the championship this year if he continues to remain consistent, finishing up front, leading a lot of laps, building points by winning stages or winning more races, because this is only his second win of the season. He could build more of this momentum into the playoffs. Who could stop him? I mean, yes, people could stop him, but momentum's on his side. He could get himself to Phoenix, and he could compete for a championship for the first time in his Cup Series career, because he's won 2 Xfinity championships. He's shown his strength before in the Truck Series despite never winning a title. But the Cup Series, we're waiting to see the talents of this kid. This kid is so young in the sport. He's still only in his late 20s, and he's still one of the most competitive drivers that we see week in and week out. We love to watch Kyle Larson, but Tyler Reddick comes relatively close. He's that dude. That's why MJ and Denny took the chance to pick this guy up and bring him to the team for 2023 after the sudden retirement of Kurt Busch due to unfortunate circumstances with him hitting the wall in Pocono in qualifying and thus developing a concussion and could never run again. But Reddick has proven to be a very solid pickup for 23XI Racing, and they probably are the best 2-car team in NASCAR right now, 23XI Racing. They keep this momentum up, they could win the championship this year. And a special one for Tyler Reddick. It was an emotional win, not just because he was finally able to get through and get to victory lane after many races this year. He had a chance to win but couldn't come up in the end. This is a special win for him because early in the week, one of his racing icons that he looked up to and idolized in the dirt racing world, Scott Bloomquist, passed away in a plane crash earlier in the weekend. It's very, very devastating news. My condolences out to the Bloomquist family. We miss him, and we're thinking about them all during this time. It's very sad to see a racing legend in the dirt racing world, tragically passed away in a plane crash, and Reddick dedicated the win to him because he idolized him, and he uses that dirt racing skills in the Cup Series to this day. So a big congratulations to Tyler Reddick and the number 45 team, and an impressive win at Michigan today. Number 2, Byron comes up short. William Byron was so close to adding another win to his win column for 2024, but in that last restart, the 45 got the better of him. Byron had a good car in general today. I don't think he was the best of the Hendrick cars per se, because before he got taken out, Kyle Larson was strong, Chase Elliott was strong, but the final stage, Byron was able to get that track position that he needed based off a 2-tire stop towards the end of stage 2. In the final stage, he was by far the best of the Hendrick cars that were remaining on the racetrack and fighting for the lead up front. Byron had good speed, and he had good long-run speed as well. He was able to take the lead late from Kyle Busch in the middle of the final stage. Looked like he was going to be on his way to adding another one, because we hadn't seen him get back to victory lane in quite a while, but he could have propelled himself to victory lane if he had a lot better race car in the final laps of the race. But once again, the 45 got by him late, and it looked like Byron was going to settle for second place until that late race yellow came out, and he was able to have another chance to restart at the front, and he got a nice restart, passing both Reddick and Ty Gibbs for the lead down off of turn number 2 before that caution came out for behind him when Ross Chastain spun around. Byron had the control of the lead when they went through the restart zone, but going into turn 1, for some reason the car stumbled and backed off a little bit and just couldn't get a good carry-on speed into 1, and he got passed by the 45 car and thus had to settle for a second place finish. Still a good points day for him and a good result, but you also wonder, geez Louise, if we weren't that ton of fuel, we could probably have a little more aggression on the restart. I think they were they were tight on fuel, and I think they were a little bit nervous about pushing the limit in case they would run out of gas. And I think the lane that he chose was proper for the restart, because if he restarted the bottom, that would have been a massive, massive wreck. I mean, maybe on the top, but he would have quickly gotten out of the way of everybody. He would go high, and everybody would pass him on the inside if he was up in the groove all by himself. But that was not the case. They were able to make it on fuel, but just fell a little bit short of getting another win this year. But nonetheless, a great performance for the 24 team. Number 3, playoff bubble continues to ramp up this weekend. Every weekend, it seems like the playoff bubble battle continues to tighten up back around the cutoff line between who's going to be able to advance into the playoffs on points and who might be left out on the outside looking in. It's been very crazy. It all took a turn for the worse this week, earlier in the week, when NASCAR announced that Austin Dillon's win from Richmond will not count towards the playoffs. He gets to keep the win, but he's not eligible for the playoffs at this time. They're trying to appeal it, and they may or may not win the appeal on Wednesday. I don't think they will, but that win took Austin Dillon for the moment out of the playoffs. Well, his actions took him out of the playoffs, and pretty much put the playoff bubble battle back in the hands of guys like Martin Truex Jr., Ty Gibbs, Ross Chastain, Chris Buescher, and Bubba Wallace, all of them still tight together. Well, Truex still has a little bit of a gap. But kicking things off, let's start with Ty Gibbs, who earlier in the race yesterday and earlier in the race today, it didn't look like he had a car that was capable of running up in the top 10 at all. They were just trapped deep in the traffic and just couldn't seem to go anywhere at all. And they need to get some momentum back on their side based on how the last few weeks have been for them. They've been rough with engine problems and no showing at Richmond last week. But towards the end of stage 2, he was one of the cars that stayed out and was able to accumulate some stage points when a big wreck happened behind him that slowed the race down. He was able to get some stage points. And after that, he stayed in the top 10 the rest of the race. And late in the race, he had some really good speed in that race car, trying to close in on the top 2, but it just wasn't enough. And I don't think he was that aggressive on the restart because as much as he would have loved to win his first Cup Series victory, he was also, I think, points racing the time, trying to conserve the amount of points that he accumulated through stage number 2 and try to maximize the points gap over the cutoff line. So a good third place result for Ty Gibbs. He's 39 points above the cutoff line entering next weekend's race. So for the moment, he's safe, but you don't know what can happen, especially when we go to Daytona next weekend. But a third place finish is good for Ty Gibbs. Then we go to Chris Buescher, who is the defending winner of this race and looked like early on in the race yesterday he was going to be one of the Fords we would be talking about for the race win. Then he got stuck back in traffic a little bit, started to pick his way back up towards the top 10. But then towards the end of stage number 2, he was caught up in a wreck off of turn 4 when Kyle Larson got around and went into the pack and collected multiple cars. Chris Buescher was one of them. And I looked at the left front. I'm thinking, buddy, you're going to have a tough time running the rest of this race. That is a big aerodynamic disadvantage with the fender the way it was. However, the RFK crew did not give up, and they fixed that fender and fixed the car. He got back out there on the track, and he was passing guys. He got up into the top 10 towards the latter part of the race and ended up coming home with a 6th place finish. I mean, seriously, when you look at that race car, how does that car finish in 6th place after being in a big wreck and getting banged up and hit by at least 3 or 4 guys when that wreck was occurring? That is insane, and a great recovery for the 17 team because now they find themselves above the cutoff line by a couple of points, but still, it's a good cushion for them to have, and it's a good recovery given what could have been worse for them had they not been able to continue and run competitively the rest of the race. So a good job by Chris Buescher and the number 17 team. But then there are some downsides from today's race, and I want to start off with Martin Truex Jr., who early on, it looked like he had one of the best cars to try to win this race. He was strong, he led a lot of laps, he accumulated a good amount of stage points for his points total. It looked like things were going to go his way, and he was going to leave the race probably with about a 90-plus point cushion and maybe could have locked himself into the playoffs after today's race. But that was not the case with 6 laps to go when the back end of the number 19 car got loose and carried himself up the track in turn 4. He smacked the wall and thus bringing out the caution, the one that Reddick was not happy about because when I looked at what happened with Truex, he slowed down, but the contact, I don't think it was enough to generate a caution in my opinion. I don't think a caution should have been called, although Truex would have probably been hurt a lot, even though the finish didn't go his way, finishing one of the last cars in the lead lap in 24th. I don't think NASCAR needed to throw a caution late for that, but it happened. We had some late race drama, yet Reddick was still able to win the race, so he wasn't totally screwed by that. But Truex, despite what happened, he did accumulate some stage points. They did run well, and they leave Michigan 70-plus points heading into the next 2 races. And based off of Reddick's win with only 2 races to go, only 2 guys now could point their way into the playoffs should we get 2 new winners in any of these next 2 races. So, Truex fans, I think you're feeling pretty good for right now. As long as the 3 team, depending on what happens with the appeal this week, if they don't win their appeal, then you'll feel a lot better. But if they do somehow win their appeal, could be sweating a little bit of bullets heading into Daytona. But for the moment, Martin Truex Jr., despite the rough result today, still pretty comfortable above the cutoff line. But then we go to 2 other guys that are literally neck and neck for that last spot on points for right now, and that is Ross Chastain and Bubba Wallace. I want to start with Bubba Wallace first. He had a really, really good car in the part of yesterday's race that we ran before the rain came and stopped the rest of it before resuming today. He had a really good car and made a 3-wide pass when the 2 guys in front of him were side by side for the lead. He carried the momentum, passed both of them to the inside on the front straightaway, and took the lead going into turn 1. And that car was really, really fast. And of course, his corner from behind tried to run up and take the lead from him off of 4, lost the car, went around. Bubba, was able to accumulate some stage points in stage 1, even though it wasn't the stage win. It was still a good chunk of points for him. And he showed good speed again earlier in the race today when we resumed. He was running up at the front, contending with his Toyota counterparts and the Chevy team. But towards the end of that second stage, that big wreck that happened off of turn 4, Bubba, unfortunately, was one of the cars that was collected in it. And from there on, the car, unlike Chris Buescher's, was not competitive enough and was never able to get back in the mix at all. He ended up finishing in 26th place, and that puts him 1 point below the cutoff line. The last couple of weeks, the 23 team has been so consistent and gaining points and building points week in and week out with the stage points, with their solid results. And today, unfortunately, was a step back. Now, they could take the positives that they had a good race car and carried it next week into Daytona, or they can grumble about it and be in a mood and just think about, whether or not they could possibly wreck themselves next week trying to go for the win. Be positive. They had a good speed, and they'll try to carry that next week into Daytona. Now, the guy that remains 1 point above the cutoff line ahead of Bubba Wallace is Ross Chastain. Like Bubba Wallace and Martin Truex Jr., he was also able to accumulate some solid stage points throughout this weekend's race. He finished 10th in the stage 1 yesterday, and earlier today he finished 2nd to Kyle Busch in stage number 2, getting 10 total stage points, helping him in his battle to try to remain in the playoffs and try to keep both Trackhouse cars in, because we know Daniel Suarez is going to the playoffs. Chastain does not have a win yet. Doesn't mean he can't win one of these last 2 races, but it looked like he was in prime position to possibly get a top 10, top 15, which would be a solid points day. And given what happened to Bubba Wallace, he was going to walk out there at least 20 points above the cutoff line. But unfortunately, the first overtime restart of the race that we had, he was the caution on the back straightaway where he got loose in the middle packer, got bumped from behind by, I think, Zane Smith, sent the one car around, and he got stuck in the grass. And he asked the safety trucks, I need a push to get out. They pushed him out, but unfortunately he fell a lap down and thus had to settle for a 25th place finish. And that rough result is what has him 1 point ahead of the 23 car. This playoff bubble battle is so tense, folks. It's going to come all the way down to the wire. And with the next 2 races being the World Center of Racing and one of the toughest tracks that is shaped like an egg, these guys have got to be on their A game, or one of them is going to find themselves outside the playoffs when we kick things off in Atlanta. But the playoff bubble battle, once again, shook up today. Number 4, chaotic moments. I talked about, of course, the big wreck in turn number 4. Took out a lot of contenders today. As I mentioned, Kyle Larson in the number 5 car got loose while trying to fight his way through the pack on fresher tires compared to other guys that stayed out towards the end of the stage number 2 when we had a restart with about 4 to go in that stage, or 3 to go in that stage. The 5 car was trying to charge his way through the field, and he got loose through turn number 4, and the back end came around, and thus sending him into the pack, collecting poor Bubba Wallace, Chris Buescher, Joey Logano, Christopher Bell, and Todd Gilliland, and Chase Briscoe. A lot of guys were torn up in that wreck, and a lot of them had been running well. As I mentioned, Kyle Larson led the most laps, say 41 laps, had one of the best cars early on. It looked like he was going to be the guy that people had to try to get by for the race win. But that looseness in the pack and sending him around collected many guys around him. Of course, mentioned Bubba and Chris Buescher, but of course Joey Logano, who of course is coming off a rough week for him, given what happened at the end of Richmond, being dumped in the last lap by the 3 car, and then being fined $50,000 for his actions on pit road by nearly running over the 3-team pit crew and their family members. I think it was the right action. Probably should have been fined $75K, but he got fined, which honestly was the proper punishment for him. But he had a decent car today, even though early caution before that, he caused it when the right rear tire went down, at the same time that the 38 of Todd Gilliland's right rear tire went down, at the same time that the 16 of AJ Allmendinger lost 2 right side tires on the front straightaway, thus generating the caution. It was pretty rough for Joey Logano, considering that he had a pretty decent car that could run the top 10. Same goes for Christopher Bell. He was running well, not on par like Denny Hamlin and early on in the first stage, or Martin Truex Jr. or Bubba Wallace, but still had a decent car nonetheless. Unfortunately, being pinned to the pack back there and being part of that wreck kind of hurts him. And of course, as I mentioned, sometimes he can be consistent and he can be inconsistent when he gets involved in wrecks. But hopefully the bad luck can, stay away when we get ready for these playoffs, and maybe for these next 2 races, they can still get the momentum back after a rough wreck. So that was the rough wreck that happened off of turn 4. But the big moment of the race was Corey LaJoie going for a ride upside down on the back straightaway, towards the beginning of the final stage. Corey LaJoie, who of course a few weeks ago announced that he's not coming back to Spire Motorsports next year, was just casually running in about the top 20, battling for position with Noah Gragson in the back straightaway. When LaJoie tried to make a pass to the inside, there was a little contact with the 10 car, and the 7 car went for a slide, and then you see the roof flaps and the hood flaps start to deploy, and the back end catches some air and sends the car upside down and sends him flipping on the back straightaway, and only did one mini barrel roll when he reached the grass. But thankfully, Corey LaJoie was okay after that wreck. Of course, NASCAR is going to take that car straight to the R&D center to find out, what happened with the car, and just look again at the roof flaps and the hood flaps and how they're able to, maintain safety and not let him get way too high in the air, else it could have been way, way worse. Of course, last time I can remember a Cup car getting upside down was LaJoie at Talladega at the finish earlier this year. But of course, a nastier wreck than that was almost 1 year ago when Ryan Preece on the back straightaway Daytona got bumped from behind, got turned into the grass, and the car went upside down. He barrel rolled at least 12 times. It was a rough weekend, for guys flipping upside down. Of course, not just LaJoie, but Saturday's Xfinity race, Kyle Sieg on the last lap got bumped from behind in the middle of a wreck, and he got sent upside down, but thankfully he was okay too. But this is the first time this weekend I can remember seeing 2 cars flip during the same weekend, and this is the first time that we've seen a flip in Michigan that I can remember since 2000 in a practice crash that Elliott Sadler had here at Michigan driving for the Wood brothers. He went into turn number 1, I think something broke, or tire went down, he went into the wall and got sent upside down. But thankfully, that day, Elliott was okay. But a rough ride today for Corey LaJoie. Thankfully, he is okay. And number 5, the racing. Really, really entertaining racing this weekend in Michigan. I know a lot of people would have loved for us to start the race earlier yesterday, knowing that there was weather in the area, and maybe we should have taken a little bit of action, but I think NASCAR just said it's a question mark with the scattered showers, especially this time of the year being summer. Well, what else can we do? But when we did get the race started yesterday, the racing from the beginning, 3 wide action, side-by-side battles. Of course, the tire compound that Goodyear brought this weekend provided some entertaining battles on the track for the lead for 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th place on back. It was some good racing this weekend in Michigan. I think they absolutely nailed the tire compound. There were great battles up at the front, comers and goers. Multiple guys were able to lead today. There were at least 4, 5, 6 guys that really were the best cars that had there were chances to win the race. Ultimately, again, at the end, it was the 45 car on top. But there were some good battles throughout the pack and earlier in these restarts that we had in Michigan. And Michigan has always been fun with restarts, and this weekend was no different whatsoever. Some great battles up at the front, great battles in the middle of the pack, 3 wide action, 3 wide moves into turn number 1 on the opening laps as everybody's getting up to full speed. It was just absolutely entertaining racing. Had me kind of on the edge of my seat on these restarts thinking, who in the world's going to come out on top before they come off of turn number 2? Or who's going to be able to win this race late in the race when we had overtime? Michigan has been a very, very interesting track over the years. I know the years that we had the 550 package, you bunch them together, you think it provides some entertaining racing, but it was a little bit tough to pass for those guys. But this next-gen car that we introduced in 2022, that race was really, really solid. Last year's race was pretty good too, but by far, this was the best Michigan race that I can remember with this next-gen car in the 3rd year of this car being at this track. It was absolutely outstanding racing from the start all the way to the finish. So props to the drivers for putting on a show, for the fans that were able to attend yesterday, and for those that were able to return today, and just really good racing in general. So good job by all the drivers today. And today was also a kind of end-of-the-era moment for now. This race today was more than likely Rick Allen on NASCAR and NBC's final broadcast for the network, as he will officially move his broadcasting duties down to the Xfinity Series for the rest of the season with NBC and USA. And then, of course, the last 8 races, NBC will be, connected within the CW network in preparation for their rights to take over Xfinity Series racing beginning in 2025 next year. Rick Allen will call the Xfinity Series races for the remainder of the season. So who will take over? It'll be none other than NBC's own Lee Diffie. Now, a lot of people are probably wondering, if they have never heard this guy before or watched him in other motor racing, what has he done over the years and who is he? Well, Lee Diffie is an Aussie. He has covered motorsports actually for quite a long time, dating all the way back to the late 2000s, early 2010s. He's a motorsports enthusiast himself. He's called racing on NBC for IndyCar, as well as Formula One when they had the rights from 2013 to 2017. He was also part of what was then the Speed Channel from the late or the early 2010s before Speed eventually became Fox Sports 1. And of course, next year with IndyCar's rights moving to Fox, Lee Diffie has ties to NBC. He can't go with them. So next upcoming weekend, he will officially take over as lead announcer for the Cup Series. And I know a lot of people are wondering, an open wheel guy calling a stock car race, does he have any experience whatsoever? As a matter of fact, he does. He's called Xfinity races before, mainly on the road courses or other racetracks as well. He actually been off races. He's called races at Richmond, I believe, in the past, back in 2015 when NBC got the rights back to NASCAR. And in 2017, he called 2 Cup Series races at Watkins Glen International and Michigan Speedway, where Rick Allen was over in Europe serving his duties for NBC to call the track races that were happening there. Not like, race cars, running track, that type of sport. But, of course, he's covered that as well with the Olympics. He did those duties this past 2 weeks, before NASCAR returned from the break. And now Lee Diffie will officially become part of the NASCAR and NBC family this upcoming weekend in Daytona. And that's an interesting place to make your debut as a, full-time member of the NASCAR and NBC family at a track, where drafting and bomb drafting matters a lot. But I have no doubt he'll do just fine. And for folks wondering about him, he brings great energy and he brings some amazing calls. Lee Diffie's going to do fine with NASCAR and NBC. So, Lee, welcome to the NASCAR and NBC family. And Rick Allen, thank you for the memories that you've made with NASCAR and NBC for the Cup Series these last few years. And we wish you the best of luck continuing the rest of the season with the Xfinity Series on NBC and the CW network. Now, we are off to the World Center of Racing, Daytona International Speedway. Now, unlike the last couple of years, this is not a cutoff race this year. Probably will be next year when the schedule eventually gets released for 2025. It sounds like we will go back to Daytona being the cutoff race. I think this has to do with the Olympic break, becoming a factor, which makes Daytona not the cutoff race and Darlington the cutoff race. But next weekend's race will be very entertaining, as next weekend 40 cars have an equal chance to get themselves to victory lane at one of the most iconic tracks that we go to in America. Aside from Indianapolis, of course. But next weekend is a chance for many guys that are way behind in points that can punch their ticket to the playoffs with a win. Kyle Busch is a former winner of this race. He hasn't won this year, and as great as he did today, finishing in 4th place, he still needs to win a race. Is he capable? Sure, he can win here. Can Ricky Stenhouse Jr., a former Daytona manager, win here? Absolutely. Can Austin Dillon, who won this race 2 years ago, to punch his ticket to the playoffs? Absolutely. Anybody can win in the World Center of Racing as long as you have a fast race car, good handling, and you make the right moves and you're in the right position coming off a turn 4 to the checkered flag. Or you set yourself up to make the move and it counts. That's where you'll be very proud of yourself. Who will come out on top next weekend in Daytona? I have no idea because it's Daytona. It's the ultimate wild card for these guys. And a lot of teams pretty much consider this their last shot because some teams, I fear, will not run that competitively at Darlington in a few weeks that gives them a chance. There are some that I think have a good shot, but this weekend at Daytona, it's really a lot of these teams' only shot and best shot to get to the playoffs. So who could come out on top? Anybody that hasn't won yet, will they be able to punch their ticket to victory lane and their ticket to the playoffs? Or will somebody that has already won this year, like a Larson, a Tyler Reddick, a Chase Elliott, a Denny Hamlin, or William Byron returning to the track where he won the Daytona 500 earlier this year? We shall see. But folks, get your popcorn ready and get your refreshments ready. Daytona on Saturday night is going to be a blast. So I hope you all have a wonderful week leading up to this weekend's race festivities. Subscribe, like, congrats once again to Tyler Reddick and the 45 team on their big win at Michigan today. Have a great week, everybody. Let's go racing!